Okay, thank you all for joining our Facebook Live on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. My name is Preston Bell. I am the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Legal Aid of the Bluegrass. With me today, I have Lee Hardwick, who is the director of the Tax Clinic at Legal Aid Society in Louisville. We also have Stephanie Flannery, who is the Tax Clinic director at AppalReD Legal Aid, and her colleague, Leanne Moore, who's a staff attorney there. So thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. As you can see from that title, there are three words that begin with B in that title, so I may refer to it as OB3 throughout this presentation. Feel free to comment in the chat, or also this video should be posted later, and you can leave comments if you have questions. We'd be happy to answer any questions that pop up related to this discussion. This is a bill that's been a lot in the news, and we want to make clear what the law actually does. Our focus here is how the bill directly affects low-income taxpayers, which is who we all represent. So just wanted to give you a brief background on low-income tax clinics. We do not charge our clients for legal assistance. We represent taxpayers in disputes with the IRS and some related state tax matters. Since our clinics are all located in Kentucky, we deal with Kentucky tax matters, but not with matters from other states. Our taxpayers have limited income. At least 90% of our clients represented in disputes have to have income below 250% of the federal poverty level. And the amount in controversy for one tax year generally cannot exceed $50,000. We also do offer interpretation services for clients who speak English as a second language. We've also got on the right-hand side here an example of some of the types of cases that the tax clinics take: audit cases, identity theft issues, collection disputes, issues with the earned income tax credit. Sometimes we provide extended representation in these disputes. Other times we may limit our assistance to simply legal advice. And just briefly, the one of the B's in One Big Beautiful Bill Act stands for big. And there's a lot of stuff that this piece of legislation contained. On this slide, I've got some references to some of the topics covered in the One Big Bill that we are not going to discuss today. Again, the focus of this presentation is on provisions of the bill that affect low-income taxpayers directly. Sorry for changing the slide there. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. New standard deduction, additional senior deduction, changes to a couple of key tax credits, tax breaks for tips and overtime, the new car loan interest deduction, and finally, Trump accounts. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who's going to discuss the new standard deduction.
Thank you, Preston. As Preston mentioned, I am Lee Hardwick. I'm with the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at the Legal Aid Society in Louisville, Kentucky. OB3, as we are referring to it, has implemented new higher standard deductions. These are shown on this slide, starting with tax year 2025. Taxpayers can either itemize their deductions on Schedule A, or they can take the standard deduction based on what is most financially advantageous to them given their particular tax situation. We can look at the next slide. And you can see here, this is a section from Form 1040 for tax year 2025, and you can see under 12E is where the standard deduction is taken or calculated. It reduces the taxpayer's adjusted gross income so that their taxable income is less. The standard deduction is based on filing status, with a different amount available for those who are married filing separately, single, head of household, or married filing jointly. The standard deduction amount is higher for those who qualify to file head of household or married filing jointly. It's even higher for taxpayers who are 65 and older, who can deduct an additional $2,000 if filing single, or $1,600 per eligible spouse if married filing jointly starting in 2025. Next slide, please. So OB3 established some other deductions that also reduce the taxpayer's taxable income. For qualifying taxpayers, those are taken on the schedule that you see on the screen now. That is Schedule 1A, and they are applied to reduce the taxpayer's adjusted gross income as well on line 13B of 1040, of Form 1040. And we're going to talk about these new deductions, starting with Stephanie Flannery, who will discuss the enhanced senior deduction.
Good morning. As Lee said, my name is Stephanie. I am the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at AppalReD Legal Aid. And today I'm going to talk with you about the bonus senior tax deduction and the changes to the premium tax deduction. Let's first start with the senior tax deduction. It is a new deduction for $6,000. It is an enhanced deduction. As Lee just said, seniors are already eligible for $1,600 or $2,000, depending on how they file their return or what their status is. But this is brand new and is $6,000 for all eligible taxpayers who are over the age of 65. It does not matter if you are still working. Even if you are working, you are eligible to claim the deduction. It is not required that you be retired. The deduction is in place for 4 years, for 25, 26, 27, and 28. So if you are eligible, you will not want to miss out on claiming this credit. As I said, it's a $6,000 deduction. So if you are married, filing jointly, and your spouse is also over the age of 65, then the deduction will total $12,000 on your return. This is a deduction, which means it reduces taxable income. It is not a refundable credit. So seniors are not going to be given $6,000. It just reduces their taxable income. The deduction does phase out depending on the level of your income. If you are single and earn more than $75,000, or if a senior is married and their adjusted gross income is over $150,000, then the bonus deduction will decrease by 6 cents for every dollar that the taxpayer is over the limit. So it does reduce slightly based on those eligibility guidelines. The deduction is available whether a taxpayer files with itemized deductions or whether they take the standard deduction. It's easy to claim this new senior deduction on the 1040 or the 1040X that a lot of seniors use. If you are using a tax software to prepare your taxes, that software is probably going to automatically grant this deduction to any taxpayers over 65 that are eligible. But you will want to just make sure that appears on your tax return before you sign it and file it if you think you are eligible. If you are filing your return on paper, it is very important that you complete Schedule 1A that Lee just showed you, and that you check the box on your return that says you are over the age of 65. And as always, triple check to make sure that your Social Security number is accurate on your return. Last thing that everyone needs to know is, unfortunately, if you file married filing separately, you are not going to be able to claim this deduction. Okay, I want to show you a slide that gives you an example of how this all works. So if you were a single filer, age 66, then clearly you would be eligible because you are over the age of 65. I came up with an example of a taxpayer who earned $50,000 in income. So that taxpayer, if they are single, are going to receive the $15,750 standard deduction, the additional $2,000 deduction for being single and over the age of 65. And now, starting in 2025, the senior bonus deduction of $6,000. So that means of the $50,000 this taxpayer earned, they are not going to pay taxes on $23,750 of that amount. So their taxable income is decreased to $26,260. So this is a really big deal for senior citizens, and I hope everyone will make sure on their return that they double check to see if they've received the bonus deduction. I do want to move on though and talk about the changes to the premium tax credit Before I do that, though, I will just point out that on the screen you see Part 4 of Schedule 1A, which shows the enhanced deduction for seniors and the boxes that will need to be filled out if you're doing a paper return. Again, if you are using tax software, it's going to compute this schedule for you, but you should review it before you file your tax return. So premium tax credits beginning in 2026, so not for the tax year you're currently filing for 2025, but next year when a taxpayer files their taxes, they may see that they owe more money for their insurance than they thought they would have, because changes have taken place for any premium tax credit that's given in advance. So let's talk about what is a premium tax credit, just so you know the basics before we go forward. When a taxpayer enrolls in marketplace insurance, some people refer to that as purchasing Obamacare insurance. But if you go into the marketplace and you purchase insurance, you have to choose whether you want the system to estimate how much of a premium tax credit you're entitled to based upon your income from the prior year, or whether or not you want to elect to claim your premium tax credit at the end of the tax year. Either way, you are going to have to fill out a form that is referenced here on the slide. It's Form 8962, and everyone has to complete it. But how it works is if you take your premium tax credit in advance, that means the government is paying a portion of your medical insurance premiums throughout the year. At the end of the year, if your income was greater than what you estimated it to be, or what the system estimated it to be, you will have to pay back any premium tax credit that you were not entitled to, that you received in advance. So that is a change. That is a big change to the premium tax credit, because prior to 2026, if you owed, then how much you owed depended on what level of your income that you fall within on the poverty guidelines. So going forward, it doesn't matter where a person is on the poverty guidelines. Everyone has to pay back anything in excess that they weren't entitled to for their advanced premium tax credit. So how do you claim the credit? I talked a little bit about that. You do it one of two ways. You do it the year before when you're estimating what it will be, or you do it at the end of the year. You always fill out Form 8962 with your taxes. You qualify for the premium tax credit if you are a taxpayer and your income, your household income, falls between 100 and 400% of the federal poverty guideline. You are a U.S. citizen, or you are lawfully present here in the United States. You have purchased a health plan through the marketplace. But keep in mind, you may not be eligible for the premium tax credit if your employer offers affordable insurance plans, or if you are eligible to receive Medicare. You can also do this and file a joint return if you are married. So that's important. You still qualify for that. If you would go to the next slide, I want to talk about the changes. I've talked about the biggest change already, which is the removal of repayment caps. But I also want folks to know there's reduced eligibility as well. Prior to 2026, there have been some individuals over 400% of the poverty guideline who were eligible to obtain insurance through the marketplace, but that is no longer the case. So beginning in 2026, any single individual with an income of over $62,600, or a family of four that has an income of over $128,600, are no longer eligible. So if you are a taxpayer and your income exceeds those levels, you can no longer purchase insurance through the marketplace or receive the tax credit. Immigration status restrictions. The credit is restricted to U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents. Basically, that means green card holders. No longer can a non-citizen, a refugee, or asylee purchase insurance or receive the premium tax credit to assist with any cost of insurance. The law mandates now annual active verification for all taxpayers who are enrolled. Prior to this change, if you fell below 150% of poverty, there were special exceptions to what you had to fill out to verify, but that is no longer the case. Lastly, it's important that everyone knows that it has been reduced slightly in terms of generosity. There is a shift away from zero premium plans. So most people who are purchasing through the marketplace are going to be paying something per month. The percentage of income that households are expected to contribute toward their premiums has increased. It's also good to know that coverage offered from an employer will be considered affordable if that cost does not exceed 9.96 of your household income. I hope that clears up a lot of things for you about these new changes. And now Preston is going to talk to us about the changes to the child tax credit going forward.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. So, like the premium tax credit, the child tax credit is another key tax credit available for low-income taxpayers. And I just want to briefly cover what the credit looked like before OB3 and just a couple of key changes. So, before the one big bill, the total credit was worth $2,000 per qualifying child. And qualifying child has a specific legal definition. The credit was partially refundable. That means that taxpayers may be eligible to receive a portion of the credit as a refund, even if the taxpayer has no tax liability. And the refundable portion in 2024 was worth a maximum of $1,700. That is a number that had increased over time with the cost of living. And before the OB3, the qualifying child needed to have a Social Security number, but that was not necessary for the taxpayer claiming the child. Now, so what are the key changes? I've put them in blue here. So the total credit is moved up to $2,200 per qualifying child. Definition of qualifying child has not changed. The credit is still partially refundable. The refundable portion is the same in 2025. It's a maximum of $1,700, but it will increase in future years with the cost of living. And this is one of the key changes to the child tax credit, is that now both the qualifying child and the taxpayer claiming the child must have a Social Security number valid for work. And so if parents of a qualifying child file a joint return, at least one spouse must have a Social Security number valid for work to claim the child tax credit. So those are the big changes to the child tax credit after OB3. So now Leanne is going to talk about some of the exciting key changes on tax-free tips and overtime. So I'll move on to her.
Thank you, Preston. As Preston said, my name is Leanne Moore. I am an attorney with AppalReD Legal Aid, and I'm going to talk about two topics that are very important to workers. I'm going to talk about tips, and I'm going to talk about overtime, because there are some common misconceptions to both of these issues. As far as tips go, many tipped workers could pay lower federal income tax on their tip earnings, and this is for 2025 through 2028 in this bill. Tip income that is qualified, and we'll talk about what qualified means a little later, can be deducted from taxable income for tax years 2025 through 2028. Up to $25,000 per year per taxpayer in income from tips can be deducted from your federal taxable income. And again, there is a phase out with this. The deduction begins phasing out for single filers above $150,000 of their modified adjusted gross income, and for married couples, $300,000. The way this works, this reduces the taxable income, but it does not remove payroll taxes throughout the year, such as Social Security and Medicare. Employees must report tips to their employer in accordance with federal law. That would include cash tips, electronic tips, and tip sharing amongst coworkers. The employers and payroll systems must track and report the tipped compensation in order to have this deduction. And then the tips must be reported on a W-2, 1099, or an IRS form 4137. As far as qualification, only workers in occupations that customarily and regularly receive tips before 2025 qualify for this deduction. The IRS has actually published an entire list of occupations that qualify, and those have been broken into 8 categories. I'm not going to list the entire exclusive list of what qualifies, but I am going to let you know the category and a few of the most common examples. The first is beverage and food service. That would be your restaurant servers, your bartenders, chefs, people that you would tip in a restaurant setting typically. The next is event and entertainment and events. That would be DJs, musicians, wedding singers, wedding planners, people in that capacity. The next is hospitality and guest services. That would be your concierge, your bellhop, someone that's working in housekeeping in a hotel, etc. The next is home services. That would be a housekeeper that you have, someone that's doing repair work, plumbers, electricians, or landscapers, someone that you would tip that would come to your home. The next is personal appearance and wellness. That's like your cosmetologist, your barbers, your hairdressers. The next is recreation and instruction. That would be such as a trainer at a gym or someone who's giving lessons for sports, like someone that would give baseball, softball lessons to your children. And the next is transportation and delivery. That would be like your taxi drivers, your Ubers, your Lyfts, or anybody that's delivering something to your home. We could look at the next slide. You will see where this would be reported on your 1040 on your Schedule 1A. There on Part 2, no tax on tips. Next, we're going to discuss tax on overtime. Eligible workers can owe less than federal income tax on overtime earnings that could potentially put more income in their pockets. Although it's often referred to as no tax on overtime, all overtime pay is still subject to withholding throughout the year, much like tips for your Social Security and Medicare taxes. This deduction is claimed on your tax return, which reduces your taxable income after the fact. The deduction applies only to the premium portion, which is the extra halftime pay of overtime required for the Fair Labor Standards Act, not the full overtime wage. So for example, if you made $20 an hour and when you're working overtime, you're receiving $30 because you're getting time and a half, only that extra $10 would be eligible for this when you're claiming this. As far as the amount of deduction, up to $12,500 per year for single taxpayers, and then $25,000 per year if you're married filing jointly. It is important to note that this deduction is available whether or not you itemize or take the standard deduction. And again, with this deduction, it does fade out for people at $150,000 or $300,000 of their modified adjusted gross income if they're filing married and jointly. And then on the next slide, you will see an example of how this is listed on your 1040 on Section 1A at Part 3. I'm going to turn it over now to Lee to talk about vehicle interest.
Thanks, Leanne. The next deduction that we're going to talk about that the OB3 established is the car loan interest deduction. This is for taxpayers who have paid qualified passenger vehicle loan interest. We may not see this very frequently in our respective practices, but in the interests of discussing the new OB3 deductions on Schedule 1A, we're including it here. This deduction is, again, as I stated, for people who have paid or accrued qualified passenger vehicle loan interest in the particular tax year. The maximum deduction that taxpayers can take under this provision is up to $10,000 of interest. How long is this available? This deduction is available to qualifying taxpayers from tax year 2025 through tax year 2028. What is qualifying interest and a qualifying loan? The taxpayer has to have paid interest during the tax year on a vehicle loan that was taken out after December 31st of 2024. So this is not applicable to loans that were taken out before 2025. It's also not applicable to taxpayers who are leasing their vehicles, nor is it applicable to loans from family members of the taxpayer. The loan has to have been taken out by the taxpayer, and it needs to have been used to, the monies need to have been used to purchase a qualifying vehicle. The loan needs to be secured by a first lien on that vehicle. So what is a qualifying vehicle? There's very specific criteria that need to be met with regards to this deduction. It needs to be a new vehicle at purchase. So this does not apply to, this deduction does not apply to used vehicles. Even a vehicle with minimal mileage that is used would not qualify here as a qualifying vehicle. The vehicle needs to be built primarily for use on public streets, roads, highways, so no golf carts, ATVs, tractors, that type of thing. a car, a minivan, a van, an SUV, a pickup truck, or a motorcycle weighing less than 14,000 pounds. So essentially a vehicle that has two wheels or more. A vehicle that was purchased by the taxpayer with the intent to use the vehicle for personal use more than 50% of the time qualifies. Also, a qualifying vehicle needs to be one where the place of final assembly was in the United States. So these are vehicles where at the last stage of assembly that took place in the US. In order for a taxpayer to determine whether or not their vehicle meets that final assembly rule, they would be looking at the label that's on the car on the dealer's premises, and that would list the final place of assembly. And they can use a search tool using the VIN number of their vehicle on the website for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and that will list the place of final assembly. Next slide, please. So how does this work? Lenders, car loan lenders will file the form, the information return form 1098 with the IRS, with a copy to the taxpayer showing the interest that they receive from the taxpayer during the particular tax year. For tax year 25, there's transition relief for lenders. Lenders need to provide taxpayers with a statement of the interest paid for tax year 2025, not necessarily a 1098. They have that transition relief before that's required. A qualifying taxpayer for this deduction will complete Schedule 1A, Part 4, and we can switch quickly to the next slide if you don't mind, so I can show that particular part of Schedule 1A. This is Part 4. This is the section the taxpayer will complete on that schedule. If we could go back to the prior slide. So as you saw, the taxpayer will list the VIN number of the qualifying vehicle or vehicles on that schedule. This deduction is available to qualifying taxpayers who take the standard deduction or those who itemize on Schedule A. Taxpayers cannot deduct the same car loan interest on other schedules at the same time that they included on Schedule A. For example, on Schedule C, where taxpayers will list some business expenses and deductions. They can't list the same interest in both places. It needs to be one or the other. How does it impact qualifying taxpayers? The deduction reduces the taxpayer's modified adjusted gross income, which in turn reduces the amount of taxable income. And the deduction begins to phase out for taxpayers with modified adjusted gross incomes over $100,000 for single and married filing separate and head of household filing status filers, or $200,000 for those married filing jointly. And the deduction will be reduced by $200 for every $1,000 that the taxpayer's modified adjusted gross income is above the phase out's lower threshold. And now I'm going to turn it over to back to Preston, who is going to discuss Trump accounts.
Yes, thank you, Lee. One thing before I get into Trump accounts that I realized that I wanted to mention was this presentation is delivered for educational purposes only. The information contained in this presentation is not intended as legal advice, nor as tax advice, nor as investment advice. And I want to make that clear before I go on to this next section about Trump accounts, which we're discussing here. This is a creation of the OB3. And it's been a lot in the news. The president referenced it recently in the State of the Union. There's articles about it. So I want to make sure to give you all the details here on what these are. So a Trump account is an individual retirement account, which those are called IRAs, which is opened in this case with a minor child as the sole beneficiary. And these rules for Trump accounts mostly mirror the rules for what are called traditional IRAs. The trustee of the Trump account is a bank or another person approved by the IRS to be a non-bank trustee. So these are going to be accounts that where the trustee is that's controlling it is at a bank or financial institution. One of the terms that these accounts use is the growth period. The growth period is from the time that the Trump account is created before the child turns 18, before the year the child turns 18. So during that growth period, Trump accounts can only invest in mutual funds or exchange traded funds, which track the returns of a qualified index like the S&P 500 and meet other criteria. And the child beneficiary must have a Social Security number in order to open one of these Trump accounts. And most people are interested in this contribution pilot program. So you can open a Trump account if you do not qualify for the pilot program. However, the people probably that are going to be most interested in opening these are folks who do qualify for the pilot program. And that's because the U.S. Treasury will contribute a one-time payment of $1,000 into a Trump account if the taxpayer elects to open these for their qualifying child. So the pilot program applies to U.S. citizen children born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028. And the taxpayer can only make this election for a child that would qualify as their quote unquote qualifying child, which is a tax term. So part of the key requirements for that is that the child has to live with them for more than half the year. There also has to be a qualifying relationship, like the beneficiary must be either the taxpayer's child, grandchild, sibling, step sibling, niece or nephew, or one of the or a descendant of one of those types of relationships. And the beneficiary has to be under 18 years old. So these are the requirements on when somebody will qualify for the $1,000 contributed by the U.S. Treasury if the taxpayer opens to or elects to open a Trump account for their qualifying child. So now that we know what they are, does it make sense to elect to open one? Now, the first question is, do they qualify for the pilot program, which again, I just covered on the last slide. Is there a U.S. citizen child born between January 1st, 25 and December 31st, 2028? Usually the parent is the one who opens this does the parent have authority to open this child or open this account for the child, meaning did the child live with the parent for more than half the year and meet the qualifying relationship? So that's probably the first question you're going to ask if you are thinking about opening one of these is, will I qualify for the pilot program for $1,000? Now, what if the taxpayer does not qualify for the contribution pilot program? Well, I wanted to bring up, there have been some stuff in the news, and one of the key announcements was in December of 2025, there was an announcement that the CEO of Dell Technologies was going to invest $250 each in 25 million different Trump accounts. And the goal, as announced, is to target children under 10 years old who live in a zip code where the median household income is less than $150,000. There have been a couple other announcements from wealthy individuals targeting specific groups of children with these to benefit with these Trump accounts. This is probably the largest story, but the details are kind of unclear at this time about the rollout of the accounts with $250 in them from the Dell family. And so we're kind of waiting details on that right now. Now, if you were to open one of these accounts, does it make sense to contribute to them? Now, one of the key ways that I'm analyzing this is that all the attorneys that are on this educational presentation, we all work at legal aid programs where we represent people with lower incomes. And so that's what we have. That's what I have in mind here when I'm thinking about these questions. These are just some questions to think about. So investing for retirement is generally a good thing if you can afford to do it. Investing can grow your assets over time. I've got a couple of examples here. If you were to qualify, your child was to qualify for the $1,000 from the pilot program and you didn't make any further contributions in 18 years at an annual growth rate of 5.4%, that $1,000 would now be worth $2,577. Now, if the Trump account was open for 28 years, and the only money put in was $1,000 from the pilot program, and annual growth rate was 8.8%, that would lead to a value of $10,607. These examples are taken from some of the data that the White House put out, the Council of Economic Advisors. And one thing that I wanted to note about that is some of the data that was released by the Council of Economic Advisors. They explained that they tested it with different growth rates, and so they brought up examples. Well, what if there was an annual growth rate of 14% or 18%? Part of, and I'm about to get into market unpredictability here. You don't know exactly how these assets will grow over time because they're dependent on the market. And also some of those figures from the White House, they are looking at data. Well, what if there were substantial contributions over time? Obviously, the numbers can get much higher if there's a positive growth rate and there are contributions that are made over time. But of course, one thing when you're investing to think about is market unpredictability. So the S&P 500, which is an index that that is targeted with this Trump account program. The S&P 500 gained 34% in 1995 in that year alone. In 2008, it also lost 38% of its value. So those are pretty wild fluctuations, and you don't know exactly what's going to happen with the market. It's obviously important to think about that. These Trump accounts, they only invest in equities, which are one particular type of investment. They don't invest in bonds. They are focused mainly on U.S. equities and not on international stocks. And so these are just things to think about if your goal is to have some diversification. Now, some other things I really want to talk about is, I mentioned earlier that all of us work at legal aid programs and we help low-income clients. Our programs help folks who are dealing with very difficult situations: job loss, unexpected large medical expenses, divorce, foreclosure, eviction. Those are all very serious things that can happen to families. And putting money that your family has into a retirement account limits its liquidity, which means that you may not be able to access it when you need it. And so sometimes if a family has to go through eviction, they might have to stay in a hotel for a while, which is going to greatly increase the costs that they have to deal with. So, and sometimes having a little bit more cash can make it a lot easier to get through challenges like that. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because the funds in a Trump account, they're designed not to be withdrawn at all until the year the child turns 18. And there's very limited exceptions on when you might be able to get a distribution from a Trump account before the year the child turns 18. And that is done to try and increase the value of these accounts over time. But that's certainly something to be aware of. Another thing to be aware of is that contributions to a Trump account are not tax deductible, which is different from some other types of retirement investments. And I also wanted to talk about general rules about IRA withdrawals before the beneficiary turns 59 and a half. Why am I talking about this? It's because the Trump accounts are a version of traditional IRAs, and a lot of the rules that apply to traditional IRAs also apply to Trump accounts, and this is one of them. So distributions before the account beneficiary, so in this case it would be the child, distributions before that child is 59 and a half years old are generally subject to an additional 10% tax penalty. So the money is taxed when it comes out in a traditional IRA, and also there's a additional 10% penalty if you withdraw it before the beneficiary is 59 and a half years old. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. And so I think one of the goals of these accounts in the OB3 is to promote college savings and to promote somebody affording a home later in life. And those are a couple examples of the exceptions to the additional 10% tax penalty. I've listed some other key exceptions, though there are a few others that are not listed on this slide. And I want to just delve down to just a couple of those because these Trump accounts have been promoted as college savings plans. That would be because of the exception for qualified higher education expenses. And I've listed some of the expenses that can qualify for that. It is pretty expansive: tuition, fees, books, supplies, It can finance the purchase of a computer if it's used primarily for school, reasonable cost for room and board if the student is enrolled at least half time. So again, if you meet that exception, you could withdraw money from an IRA before the beneficiary is 59 and a half and get it and avoid the 10% additional penalty. And so this is really the point I'm trying to emphasize on this slide, is just make sure you know the rules. If you are counting on this money to help your child afford a home later or to afford education expenses. And just one more point on the home buyer exception is that it's limited to $10,000 right now, that exception to the 10% early withdrawal penalty. So here's the form if you want to fill it out. I've also listed the website here. One thing I wanted to note is in part 3 at the bottom of this form where it asks if you're eligible for the pilot program contribution, it is important to know whether the child is a qualifying child for you. Did they live with you for half the year? Does it meet the relationship test that we discussed earlier? You certainly should not purport on this form to be eligible for the $1,000 pilot program if you don't have a qualifying child that is eligible according to those criteria that I mentioned earlier. You can also go on trumpaccounts.gov and find a way to, there's a button that says get started where you can fill out your information there if you wish to open one of these. So thank you. That was the last topic that we had for today. And again, just to reiterate, this was for educational purposes only. It's not intended as legal advice, tax advice, or investment advice. I've listed the contact information here of all of the presenters, and certainly we'd be happy to take any questions if there are from Facebook. I'm not sure if there are.
While we're looking for that, Preston, if I may, I want to correct something that I said earlier, and it was something that I misspoke, and I want to make sure everyone's clear about it. I said that you weren't eligible to participate in the marketplace if your income was above 400%. That's not true. Anyone can purchase insurance through the marketplace as long as they are a resident of the United States, they are a U.S. citizen, and they are not incarcerated. So if you want to purchase insurance through the marketplace and pay the premiums, anyone can do that if they are eligible, but they are not eligible for the tax credit to help them pay for their premium. So I apologize that I misspoke about that, but I wanted to clarify that.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I'm being told that we don't have any questions in the chat right now, so I think we can wrap it up. Thank you all so much for attending. And if you all have a tax dispute that you want to seek legal assistance with, feel free to contact the different tax clinics that are listed here. Thank you.
Thanks.